So good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all here remotely for this special event on shared mobility in ASEAN. So ASEAN covers 10 Southeast Asian nations, and today from Phnom Penh, you will get to see and experience shared mobility in Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And we also have live music from our Malaysian friends right here.
So before we start the program, a little background on the summer project. The summer project for which Sovan and I work as technical advisors is a Asian DZ project implemented by GFA, and summer itself stands for Sustainable Mobility in Metropolitan Regions, and it's essentially an urban governance project through which we support local authorities in many Asian cities and countries to implement sustainable concepts, principles, and strategies.
So like one of the key topics identified by the summer team, GIZ and ASEAN, relates to multimodal interchange hubs. So what are those exactly? Well, look around in your city, they're everywhere. They can be airports, train stations, bus stops, or even coach stations.
And these places, these hubs, are essentially nodes in a global transport network, allowing a commuter to jump from one mode of transport to another. And in essence, this allows them to have multimodal mobility.
So shared mobility, what is it exactly? Well, it is the shared use of shared vehicle of a transport mode that can either be a bicycle, a motorcycle, or even a car, and it gives short time access to those when needed. So during this live event, the summer team will take you across the ASEAN region, and we'll see what's happening in shared mobility to see how geographical and cultural specificities have an influence towards shared mobility. We are going to start in Phnom Penh with go-to service by Oika, which is in a sense an electric mob sharing systems. Then we'll cross the borders and see what's happening in Hoi An, Vietnam.
And later, we're going to swim across the South China Sea to reach the shores of the beautiful country of the Philippines to see what's rocking with their iconic jeepneys. And finally, if we have time, we'll go right back to Phnom Penh and get a grasp on how a historical mode of transport is potentially going extinct. And this is this vehicle we have right next to us. However, it's unlikely we'll have time to show that video, but we can share a link in the future. But before playing any of these videos, we have amongst us some speakers and representatives from the various companies and organizations that will be presenting. And first, we'd like to introduce none other than Carl Wong. Carl Wong, are you with us?
Yep. Hi, Conrad. Savanarit. Good to see you.
So it'd be great if you could give us, yes.
Yeah, Joe, a little short introduction on GoTo. Firstly, welcome to Phnom Penh, and I just want to thank the guys from Summer and the Mobility Rocks guys. Just fantastic, all the work you've done, and I'm sure there's tons and tons of it behind the scenes. But thank you for doing all of this and for giving us the platform. We started in Phnom Penh in the middle of 2019 and set up a battery swap infrastructure business. We set up 12 swap stations around the city, launched a bunch of motorbikes. To be perfectly honest, the take-up wasn't brilliant. We had a lot of difficulty convincing and educating the market about how you save money with electric vehicles over a period of time. And that was a fundamental basis upon which we launched the business, that we wanted to make it cheaper than ICE vehicles. So then we sort of pivoted to shared mobility, and we started the rideshare business in May of last year. And that's taken off quite well. We don't have very many bikes on the road. We've got about 40 at the moment, but we've got 250 on the water. So we'll have 300 bikes on the road by about the end of May. So that's really what we've set up, what we've done. It's good to see that people are converting, and there's quite a lot of demand in Phnom Penh. So we're really excited about the future and think that the capacity here is going to be about 1,000 to 2,000 bikes in Phnom Penh. We've also launched in Jakarta in October of last year. And Indonesia is absolutely flying because there's such a top-down decree from the president to go electric all over the country. So that country is really, really flying. And that's just very promising, right? When you look at the climate initiatives around the world and the sort of depression with which the speed of governments move, there are just so many opportunities in the private sector. I think business will drive this because we're at this beautiful place where electric vehicles are now cheaper than petrol vehicles if you get it right. All right, so before I ramble on too long, I'll just pass this back to you, Conrad. Again, thank you to the Summer guys, and thanks again to the Mobility Shared Mobility Rocks guys. Fantastic.
Thank you, Carl. Well, thankfully, we have a video that really covers all that you just said in a very visual format. And personally, since first trying GoTo as part of the video we created, whenever I see a GoTo and I'm on my way to somewhere, I will pick one up. They're so much fun. They're extremely convenient. And I think next up, I would like to introduce Ngan Tran, the CEO of Kick Vietnam.
Hi everyone, Ngang is here.
Hi, Ngan.
Yes, yes, I am Ngang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kit Vietnam. We started from Singapore as an electric bicycle company in Singapore. But once we venture out in Vietnam, we are deploying both electric and mechanical bicycle sharing system in Hoi An and Hanoi city of Vietnam. We hope that with this city, the Vietnamese people they will have, we will encourage the green mobility in the country itself and encourage the use of shared mobility in the country. And we have gotten a lot of support from GIZ and HealthBridge in Vietnam to help us to deploy the projects in Hoi An and Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's very nice to be with you here today to share about our project and learn from other projects as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nhan Tran. And you mentioned HealthBridge. So I will let Tran Quintana present herself and how HealthBridge helped Kick to be introduced in Vietnam. Hello, Tran Quintana. Can you hear us?
To turn on the mic. Okay.
It's all right.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so my name is Ta and I'm River City Project Manager of HealthRich. It's an international NGO and I'm based in Hanoi, Vietnam. At HealthRich, we consider active transportation modes is a for cleaner and healthier environment is an important component to build river cities. In 2018, the 2Me Challenge Award enabled us to support Hoi An City to become a bicycle-friendly city. And we work with the city government and Quick company to develop the Hoi An bike sharing scheme, which is the first bike sharing scheme in Vietnam. It's my pleasure to be here and share with you about our project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll let Patricia Mariano present herself before starting the first video.
Hi everyone, good morning, and thank you for having me today. So I'm Patricia Mariano. I'm an advisor and the Philippine project manager of GIZ Transfer. GIZ Transfer is a project that facilitates the development of ambitious transport mitigation actions. And in the Philippines, we've been working on the PUV Modernization program, which you will hear about in a video later on. But in addition to that, we've also been working on this Philippine Urban Mobility Program, which has identified key components of active transport, public transport, urban freight, TDM, and TOD. And the basic idea is really just to strengthen the support between national and local governments so that cities can implement the sustainable urban mobility that they need. Yeah, looking forward to the presentations and looking forward to hearing from everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Patricia, and thank you to all the participants who contributed, but also thank you to Shared Mobility Rocks. You increased our workload significantly the last month, but you were also the catalyst that brought all of us together. And I think we have formed very interesting relationships with everybody that featured in our videos. So without further ado, I think we can kick off the first video. It doesn't need much of an introduction. It is GoTo that Carl previously spoke about. So back to the studio in Brussels, or in Ghent, my apologies. You can roll the first video.
SMMR, also known as SUMMER, stands for Sustainable Urban Mobility in Metropolitan Regions in ASEAN. SUMMER is an ASEAN-German cooperation project with the objective to implement concepts and strategies for integrated and sustainable mobility across the 10 ASEAN member states. The Summer German Cooperation Project is implemented by GFA Consulting Group together with Clean Air Asia, the Wuppertal Institute, and Ruprecht Consult on behalf of GIZ and the ASEAN Secretariat.
Hello everyone, I'm Conrad.
Hi there, my name is Soban.
And we're out in the streets of Phnom Penh by Independence Monument. And as you can see, this is a city dominated by petrol-powered and extremely noisy motorbikes.
However, is there a more sustainable way to commute around Phnom Penh?
Surely there must be.
Let's find out.
So the first shared e-moped platform actually launched just last year in Phnom Penh.
Which is really quite cool, as it is the only example of electric and shared mobility in Cambodia. As you are probably aware, there are similar concepts in many developed cities worldwide, including Japan and Taiwan in Asia. But from a smart and sustainable mobility perspective, these systems and services are quite revolutionary.
Because they really represent a fusion of hardware, which is the motorbike and the batteries, and software, the booking platform and operational platform. And when these come together, they create ideal first and last mile solutions.
Beyond the hardware and software, their success depends largely on their business model, how they are implemented, marketed, integrated, and scaled.
Which is no small feat, especially considering every city has a unique DNA, and so they require a localized development and implementation strategy. And the company GoToRide recently launched in Phnom Penh, which represents the first implementation of its kind in an Asian emerging city.
So naturally, we are very interested to see how this smart and sustainable mobility solution was implemented, the challenges that needed to be overcome, and just see how things are going on since it was implemented.
So tomorrow we're out to meet Carl Wong, the founder, to learn more.
Let's go. Hi guys, so we are in OICA headquarters in Phnom Penh. We're here to meet Carl Wong, who is the president and founders of OICA.
So just to be clear, OICA is the Singaporean company that builds the battery swap and charging infrastructure, and GoTo is their shared e-moped system and brand here in Cambodia.
Yes. Hi, Carl. Nice meeting you. Hi.
Honor, pleasure.
Hi. So thank you, Carl, for having us in your offices today.
Pleasure.
So can you tell us more about GoTo?
OICA started in July 2019 with a view to set up infrastructure for electric vehicles, primarily, or at least to start, two-wheelers. So we set up some battery swapping infrastructure. Found it quite tough going to sell the motorcycles that we brought in. So what we did was we pivoted to rideshare because we really felt that the economics mattered, right? We're here with a green message, but it's no point trying to sell a green message off the back of something that doesn't make economic sense. So it was a fundamental priority to get prices below prices of petrol-driven vehicles, and we felt we could do that with a rideshare system. So we set the rideshare system up. We have 40, 45 bikes, depending on the day, and we're probably getting in the region of about 100 to 150 rides a day. There appears to be more demand than we can handle, and the reason we can't get more rides is because there are so few bikes, and a lot of the people that ride the bikes hog the bikes, so they take them into their house at night and sort of lock it up so nobody else can access it. We're resolving those problems. 150 bikes on the way, and shortly after that we'll ship another 100 out. So by the end of April we're going to have about 400 bikes on the road in total.
And can I ask, why Cambodia?
And it's also a very good test market. It's sort of smaller, and if you're going to make mistakes, perhaps this is an easier place to make it. It's also slightly more deregulated than a lot of our Southeast Asian neighbors. We've now started in Indonesia with the battery infrastructure setup. We started that in October, and that's going quite well. So we're going to run these programs simultaneously. We intend soon to go into electric tuk-tuks and set up charging posts around the city. Again, Cambodia will be the primary city to make that work before we export it elsewhere.
Can you tell us more about the challenges that you faced?
There are technical issues, obviously, that need to be resolved. There are internet issues. If you've got pockets of the internet that go down, that can be really, really problematic, because once it goes down, then nobody can book a bike and we get flooded with customer calls and so on. There are other issues related to the city. So for example, it's very difficult to park your bike wherever you want to park it, right? You either park it at, for example, a coffee shop where somebody will give you a ticket for the bike, you walk into the coffee shop, and now nobody else can take the bike because you've got the ticket, right? So we face those sorts of issues everywhere, but there are solutions to it. So for example, people who ride home at night, we let them bring the bikes inside the house. We've had 6 bikes stolen, but we've got GPS trackers and we've got the ability to switch the bikes off. So within a few hours, we've pretty much recovered all the bikes.
How does a user can take an e-mop? Where can he take it?
Yeah, it's really easy to use. You download the app, you do registration, you load up an ID, so a photograph of your ID card or your passport, and then within about 2 hours or under 2 hours, you should get a call from our customer service. They'll verify identity and then they'll explain how you use the bike. They'll then give you 2 free hours, and then you just search for a bike on the app, you book it, you've got I think 15 minutes to get to the bike, and then you press start ride, right? And you jump on the bike and you just ride it. We've surrounded the city with a geofence, which means you have to leave the bike somewhere within the geofence. You're welcome to take it outside and ride it outside, but you've just got to bring it back within the geofence. And the only other perhaps interesting function is there's a pause function on the bike, so you can take it outside the geofence, you can pause it there, and we simply charge you 1 cent a minute, so you can hold on to a bike for an hour, for example, for 60 cents. And that helps, in situations where you want to go into a restaurant, have a meal, and make sure the bike is still there when you get out. The way to do that is to pause it, and then the bike disappears from everybody else inside, and nobody can book the bike.
At first, the e-mop were available only at Cyclo Mini Mart.
Yes.
But it appears to me that now they are available pretty much anywhere in the city.
Yeah, they've actually always been available wherever you can find them. So because we have so few bikes, we decided to operate a hybrid system, meaning you can find the bike at a dock and you can drop it off anywhere. But if you find it by the side of the road, you can use it as well. Our hope is if we have enough bikes, we might end up being a dockless system, or we might retain the hybrid system. The value of the hybrid system is that there's certainty for the user. They always know that at this dock there's almost always going to be a bike there.
And this is what is interesting to us. Before we work on what we call interchange hubs.
Right.
So you have a variety typologies of interchange hubs, right?
Yes.
Like micro hubs,
yeah,
which are basically the bus stops.
Yeah.
And this is where a solution like GoTo is pretty interesting to us because it provides a first and last mile trips.
Yeah. I mean, that's the holy grail, right? We want all of this to be seamless. We want the guy to be riding on a bus, arriving at the hub and then clicking on a button and booking his bike. So he jumps off the bus and he's on the bike, and the same with the trains and so on, right? From a train to a bus, from a bus to a bike. And I mean, I think we can do that. We have the technology now. It's just getting the right partners together to make that work.
You said earlier, you mentioned the battery. Can you tell us more about how does it work exactly?
So the battery swap system solves some of the problems of electric vehicles, which are things like range, right? So you've got maybe a 50-kilometer range on a small battery. If you've got a well-distributed network of battery swap stations, you solve that problem, right? The second problem it solves is charging time, right? If you've got a lead-acid battery, you take it home and you plug it in, you're talking 8 hours, right? So if you run out of battery in the middle of town, you're in serious trouble. So again, swap stations solve that problem instantly, right? Because 60 seconds it becomes a swap. So we've alleviated those two problems, and there's a third sort of related problem, which is the problem of speed, right? You can only go at a certain speed. These bikes will go to 50 kilometers an hour, but that problem is solved by Phnom Penh traffic, right? We can't go 50 kilometers an hour. So in a sense, the battery swap has helped solve all the major problems that electric vehicles have. There's a lot of synergy between the battery swapping and the ride share, right? So the obvious synergy is that there are two ways to charge the bike. Either you bring it back to your warehouse and you plug it in, and for lithium-ion batteries you charge it for 4 hours. Or the alternative is you have a crew running around doing battery swaps. So that's what we're currently doing now. But what we'll do later this year is we'll have a function to incentivize customers to do the swaps. So there'll be a feature in the app which says something like, if you're riding a bike with less than 30%, a message will pop up and say, if you swap the battery, you'll get the ride free. And these battery swaps can be done in under 60 seconds. You basically scan a QR code on a cabinet, a door will pop open, you put the empty battery in, another door will pop open, and you pull the fresh battery out, you put it in the bike, and then you're going to get a free ride.
It's like a video game, right?
Yeah.
Like customers, they're seeking for e-mop, like with low battery.
Exactly.
And it is one way to actually make mobility more sustainable, right?
Exactly.
To give ownership to customers.
Yeah, exactly. What I'd really like to see, and I've not seen it done anywhere in the world, but is I'd like to see the rides free for customers. And I think there are advertising models by which we can monetize this, right? So we can do a lot of work in conjunction with retailers and coffee shops to bring people to the coffee shops and give the ride to the customer free. So I think that's inevitable and almost necessary from a competitive point of view, right? Because you're constantly looking over your shoulders to see who the next big player is that's going to come into the market, and then you start getting into these price wars. We're pricing our vehicles so that on a unit economic basis they are sustainable, right? They've got to make money from a business point of view, otherwise you just can't expand the fleet, right? But you're always fearful that someone with a lot of money is going to come in and do something very different, right? Just scale as a land grab. The way to protect against land grabs is to make rides free, right? Because then there's nowhere else to go.
Okay, one more question about climate change.
Yes,
because climate change is, I would say, one of the biggest challenge that humanity is going to face. How would you say that a service like GoTo alleviate climate change?
I mean, we're a small player, right? We've calculated the greenhouse gas savings we're going to make for this year, right? So we know those numbers, and it's an impact, but it's a small impact. But I think the much bigger impact that companies like GoTo make is, what's been interesting was that we started having to sell electric motorcycles for the infrastructure that we set up, and as I said, that was hard going. Right? Now we've put the motorbikes on the road, and customers are now coming back to us and saying, look, we want to buy the bikes, right? Because now they've had an experience of it. So the major function that GoTo will play in terms of climate change is a process of education, right? Once people understand that these are fantastic vehicles to ride. I mean, I've been a motorcycle rider all my life, right? And there is nothing like riding an electric bike, right? At the traffic light, these are tiny bikes, right? They've got 800 watt motors in it. And at the traffic light, I'm always the first guy away, right? I mean, you just turn that throttle and the bike goes, right? Fast, they're quiet, they're cheap, they're maintenance free, right? And once people learn that, there is going to be a revolution, right? These bikes are going to take over, and they will be the dominant player in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Okay, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
After our insightful discussion with Carl, it was time for us to sign up and try them out for ourselves. So we registered ourselves to the app and got our first 120 free minutes. And the registration process itself was surprisingly straightforward. Using the app, we then located some bikes nearby and called over our summer colleagues that are also based in Cambodia. So now we're off to go try them out for ourselves. Our colleague Sotea here, our national expert from Cambodia, has joined us, and we've located 2 bikes on the app, and we're on our way to go find out exactly where they are. We then activated the e-mopeds via the app, and as you can see, it took us very little time to figure out how to activate them. And it also didn't take long for us to adjust to the new electric moped driving experience. After getting used to the bikes, we hit the road and went on a little tour of the colorful and chaotic city that is Phnom Penh. First, we left the small side streets and joined the mixed traffic along one of Phnom Penh's main boulevards leading towards the iconic Independence Monument. So Van, what are your first impressions?
Well, the e-mop is actually pretty fast. I think it's pretty convenient for commuting around the city.
We then made our way towards Riverside, where we took a break and tested out the GoTo pause function. After our break, it was time to get back to work, and so we returned towards Independence Monument, this time through some of the back streets, and before ending our trip, we took the opportunity to document our feedback.
So, Sawan, how was your ride?
The riding experience was pretty smooth.
Yes, and didn't you find it dangerous that nobody hears you?
That was actually one of my remarks when I saw you ride. I didn't hear you at all.
I will use this every day now. I mean, so convenient. And it's so much fun. Yes, especially bringing the boy to school. That will be great. Sleep 15 minutes longer every morning. Yes.
យើងគួរសាកល្បងអស់គ្នាស្ងាត់ល្អអត់មានសំឡេងរំខានហើយម្យ៉ាងទៀតគឺកាត់បន្ថយនៅការបញ្ចេញឧស្ម័នហើយងាយស្រួលរកដោយការមានទូរស័ព្ទដៃមួយគឺគ្រប់គ្រាន់បើឲ្យចំណាយតិចបើធៀបជាមួយនឹងកង់ Let's try.
It was really good. I was really surprised. It's a smooth ride, it's really quiet. You don't get the jolting you would get if it was a gear shift. I could see myself using this. However, the fact that there's not so many, there's not such a wide network of e-mopeds yet in the city is a shame, but it's a young company. Hopefully in the future they can expand. Once they've expanded, I can reach a point where I don't need to rely on a bicycle or a private mode, I would be very happy to take these because I think we all had a lot of fun. This is a great initiative and it's certainly a feature of the future.
This brings us nicely to the end of the video, and all considered, GoTo in Phnom Penh is certainly a timely solution, especially with the continued rise in congestion coupled with the widespread adoption of smartphones, because to avoid the kind of gridlock seen in Manila and Bangkok, this city really needs clean, quiet, cost-effective and space-efficient mobility solutions. But we also need to look at the bigger picture here. These are much more than just a fun mode of transport, and assuming widespread adoption, they can have a positively disruptive impact by making privatized mobility optional and no longer necessary. And this in itself has many benefits. To us individuals, for example, we'll no longer need to pay for parking, or remember where we parked our bike, or even think about maintenance, and so we can live more car-free and carefree. But also have many benefits to wider society, the environment, and the economy. For instance, shared e-motorbikes are fast, flexible, and cheap, and they contribute significantly less to congestion and urban expansion than private cars, and they therefore encourage urban densification, which significantly lowers resource and energy consumption. And if planned with integration in mind, for example with interchange hubs, they can make high-capacity public transport more viable by increasing station accessibility and enabling multimodal first and last mile trips. For instance, GoTo could be integrated into the planned Phnom Penh BRT stations, which in turn would increase station accessibility and result in a win-win for both the BRT and for the GoTo service by increasing the overall ridership. And perhaps at this moment in time, a fully electrified vehicle fleet in Phnom Penh seems a little far-fetched, but if you could go back in time to say the 1960s to a time when the main form of public or shared mobility was the three-wheel tricycle, here known as the Cyclos, you would never have imagined that in several decades the city would be dominated by petrol-powered vehicles and that the Cyclos would be on the verge of extinction. And the point being, transport systems evolve towards what is most convenient, efficient, and of course available. And as Carl mentioned, now that the e-motorbikes are more cost-effective than combustion motorbikes, it's really only a matter of time. It is worthwhile mentioning that although GoTo is the only shared e-moped service in ASEAN, it is not the only electric vehicle supplier. In Cambodia alone, there are a number of electric car, motorbike, and even bicycle suppliers, which is good because competition is healthy. And in early February, the Cambodian government formally launched a campaign to raise awareness of the social, economic, and environmental benefits of e-mobility for Cambodia. And on a very final note, it's really inspiring to see an emerging city like Phnom Penh welcome an innovative app-based shared e-mobility solution and business model like that of GoTo. And it's also very encouraging to see that a company like Oika, through their GoTo service, is able to overcome the many economic, technical, and political challenges of deploying a shared e-mobility solution in an emerging city context. And it goes to show that smart mobility solutions are not and should not be limited to just cities with advanced technological systems, so I sure hope that this deployment can inspire other cities in Southeast Asia to follow suit. So if you live in Phnom Penh, or if you have a similar system or service in your city, do go out and give them a try and join us in this electric and shared mobility revolution. For more information, visit us at www.summer.asia or find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We look forward to seeing you there.
Wow, a lot has been learned in this first video, especially on what needs to be for successful implementation on shared mobility in Phnom Penh. So if you have any question, feel free to ask them now.
So to let us know if there's any questions. If there are no questions, Sylvain, I'm curious, since we created this video a couple weeks ago, have you started using the GoTo more and more?
Well, thanks, Conrad, for asking. Well, it's funny because I actually wrote one. It's actually this one to come here. And what I truly enjoy when riding those is that sense of freedom that I have. And as it turns out, it is actually less expensive to ride these e-mop scooter than just riding a tuk-tuk.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. The other night when I was coming home from doing groceries, we spotted one outside the shop with my girlfriend, and we thought, you know what? Let's not go home yet. Let's go on like a late evening ride. So yeah, there's so much more than just a mode of transport. They're also just fun because they're different, really different riding dynamics.
Carl, is there anything that you want to add to this video that wasn't covered?
No, I think you guys, you it, and I'm glad you enjoy using it. We're getting a lot of good feedback from users, and we're just really keen to scale this thing up and see how big it can grow.
I think it's only a matter of time. I parked one outside my house the other day, and in my little neighborhood, all my neighbors came out and they were like, "What is this? What is this? I've never seen you on a bike before. When did you buy a bike?" And which I did my best to explain what it was. And I see you now have a Cambodian stickers indicating or explaining how to sign up, which I think is great.
Yeah,
but
yeah, we've got a QR code on the bike, so that people can scan it and download it. But one of the points I made in the video that was quite interesting was that people are now coming back as a result of bikes, and are now asking to purchase electric bikes. And the irony of anything to sell at the moment, it's all slated for go-to. So we've actually started a longer-term rental program as well. For the heavy users, they can book it by the day, by the week, or by the month, and that'll save them even more cost.
Great.
Is there any questions?
And we'll check. Are we? Yes, we're back. Okay, so before we kick off our second session, we have Ali here from Malaysia, another Asian country that's not represented in the video, but a lot of interesting things are happening there. We will not be covering that, but we will be covering songs. So without further ado,
we need to set up to actually. I think it'll be okay.
Yeah.
I hope the sound is not too robust. I don't trust myself. Should I start now?
Yeah, please. Okay.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, Orange Mountain, Shenandoah River, rising older, older than the tree, younger than the mountain, flowing like a breeze. Country road, take me home to the place I'm in love. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home. Country road, all my memory, get around here. Niners lady, stranger to blue water, dark and dusty, faded on the sky. Misty days of moonshine, they drop in my eye. Country road, take me home to the place of love. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home. Country road, I hear a voice in the morning hours. She call me. Radio remind me of my home far away. Driving down the road, I got a feeling that I should have been home yesterday. Yesterday, country road, take me home to the place I've been loved. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home. country road, country road, take me home to the place I'm in love. West Virginia, mountain mama, take me home, country road, take me home, country road, take me home, oh country road. Thank you.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you, Ali. I saw a couple questions come in to speak about one of them. Maybe Carl, you probably can also see some of the questions. One of them is related to government regulations here. And what's interesting is essentially the lack of government regulations here is what makes the system so effective and successful. But obviously these are likely to be introduced in the future. Carl, would you care to speak to that?
You're right. There are not that many regulations. In fact, you're not required to have a license in order to ride an electric bike at the moment in Phnom Penh. We try to work as closely as we can with the government. So we've put a couple of proposals before them, one of which looks likely to go ahead, where we'll be providing last mile transportation for the city bus network. Unfortunately, it's closed at the moment due to COVID. So, our intention is not to come here and dump bikes and mess the city up. It's really to work as closely with the government as we can in a responsible way, so that everybody appreciates the value that the electric bikes bring to the city without becoming a nuisance, especially when you scale and you have a large number of bikes there. But at the moment, it is somewhat deregulated.
So I am conscious of time. Perhaps we can answer the questions in the chat later on while the next video is playing. But next up, we have a video now from our neighbors in Vietnam that showcases a very young and interesting shared mobility company called Kick Vietnam. So we're going to present their work to date and also take a step back and look at how this solution is particularly important in the Vietnamese context. Vietnam or Vietnamese cities are quite unique in a mobility perspective, and you will see exactly why in the video. And we will talk a little bit about how this solution that will be presented is potentially the missing link to make the whole mobility ecosystem function a whole lot better. So just as a side note, this whole event was a bit of a sprinting marathon for us to create all the videos. This particular video, I woke up at 4 this morning, I finished around 6. So it's still a bit rough on the edges, but it does tell a really nice story. So please, studio in Ghent, feel free to roll the next video.
SMMR, also known as SUMMER, stands for Sustainable Urban Mobility in Metropolitan Regions in ASEAN. SUMMER is an ASEAN-German cooperation project with the objective to implement concepts and strategies for integrated and sustainable mobility across the 10 ASEAN member states. The SUMMER German cooperation project is implemented by GFA Consulting Group together with Clean Air Asia, the Wuppertal Institute, and Ruprecht Consult on behalf of GIZ and the ASEAN Secretariat.
Welcome back, Conrad Richardson here, the Summer Technical Advisor, and in this video we're off to Vietnam to learn more about and document shared mobility innovation. I'm especially excited for this one because Vietnam is truly a fascinating and unique country in terms of urban mobility, and Vietnam also holds a very special place in my heart. Allow me to elaborate. Back in 2015, as part of my master's, I had to write a 10,000 word dissertation on a topic of my choice, And at the time, well still now, I was very interested in bus rapid transit systems, BRT, as well as informal transport, and I was looking for a topic that would marry both of these themes. After considering several locations, I decided to focus my research on Ho Chi Minh City, and so I spent 1 month living and researching the Xe Om, which are informal motorcycle taxis found around various cities in Vietnam. And the Xe Om, as a form of mobility, possess many strengths and weaknesses, but together they have a collectively damaging behavior. And so through my research, I developed a concept to modernize and digitize the Xe Om and essentially minimize their weaknesses, and also looked at ways they could potentially be integrated with the proposed Ho Chi Minh City BRT, a classic example of shared mobility integration with mass transit. And keep in mind, this was back in 2015, before Grab Bike ever entered the Vietnamese market. But before going any further, for those of you not familiar with the transport situation in Ho Chi Minh, let me give you a little taste and context. And to do so, I'm gonna use my very first attempt at creating a cinematic video all the way back in 2015. So as you will see, Ho Chi Minh City is known as the motorcycle capital of the world for good reason. But how did this end up being the case? Well, in 1986, Vietnam underwent the Doi Moi economic revolution, which initiated a political transition from a centrally planned economy to a market-oriented socialist economy under state guidance. With this, Vietnam joined the industrial wave that was spreading in East Asia, and this fueled rural-urban migration and also flooded the market with motorbikes and scooters, which quickly replaced bicycles because they offered more effortless mobility compared to cycling in the harsh and humid environment. And the high price and import tax on private cars kept their numbers relatively low. And so over time, the city evolved around the motorcycle, creating what can be best described as a motorcycle-dependent city where two-wheelers outnumber all other forms of transport and now make up 86% of the total vehicle mode share, while public transport only accounts for 5%. And today, owners live and sleep just a few steps away from their motorbikes and use them for almost all daily functions. And that being the case, they very much form the backbone of the economy. And as you can see, they cradle a heavy responsibility. And with that, walking, the most natural form of human activities, has been sidelined, and in many ways, pedestrians have been rendered third-class citizens, left to navigate unattractive, inefficient, and hazardous streets dominated by moving and parked motorbikes. And so my hypothesis was that because Ho Chi Minh City is such a unique city being dominated by motorcycles, that traditional public transport planning and forecasting models typically developed for automobile-dependent cities would probably not apply well to Ho Chi Minh City. And that being the case, Ho Chi Minh City needs to be especially thoughtful when locally adapting its plans and designs to factor for the uniqueness of moto mobility. And with that in mind, I had suggested that the planned Ho Chi Minh City BRT would not achieve its forecast ridership, because one, the BRT stations are inaccessible on foot due to the many obstacles and just generally poor walking environment, and two, there's a general unwillingness to leave your own motorbike unattended for long periods of time, and because the BRT stations weren't designed with large parking spaces in mind, many people would just choose not to use the BRT and rather just drive from their home to their destination or from their destination to their home. And my proposal to overcome this issue was to introduce one or several kinds of shared mobility to be integrated with the BRT station design. And my proposed concept was to formalize, digitize, and integrate the Xe Om, so the motorcycle taxis, but that a bike sharing system could be even better. Because after all, the success of a public transport system really depends on how accessible it is. And there's really three pillars to creating accessible public transport. Accessibility to the service, so from the wider area through, say, feeder services. Accessibility to the stops and stations by making the surrounding areas very walkable or accessible by first and last mile shared transport. And then accessibility to the vehicles themselves, so whether people can easily board and alight the vehicles on foot, in wheelchairs, with bicycles, etc. So sorry there if I used a lot of technical jargon, but in more simple terms, the concept was to expand the capture area of the public transport station beyond the traditional 400 to 800 meter walking distance. Generally, how far people are willing to walk. This translates into roughly 8 to 16 minutes, but in 8 to 16 minutes with a different shared mode of transport, you can cover a much larger distance. With a motorbike or an electric bicycle, for example, that can be expanded between 1 and 5 kilometers, and so the public transport station has the potential to capture much more people. And if it captures much more people, it will have a higher ridership, and if more people are riding the public transport, more people will probably also be riding the shared services at the public transport stations. So it's a win-win scenario for both the public transport system and the shared mobility service. This leads us to present day, and much has happened since 2015. So let's take a quick look at the BRT systems that have since been implemented.
In the case of Hanoi, the BRT project was proposed in 2006 with the aim to increase urban mobility in targeted areas in Hanoi by increasing the use of public transport. It was expected to mitigate 30 to 50% of motorbike users by 2020. However, with the current demand of only 8,000 passengers per day, it seems that the BRT and Hanoi will not be very helpful to reach this objective. Similarly, in Ho Chi Minh City, a BRT corridor was piloted along one of the main boulevards, and after seeing low ridership numbers and frequent encroachment from motorbikes in the BRT lanes, the BRT system and supporting infrastructure was dismantled.
However, at the same time, since 2015, there's been a lot of innovation in electric and shared mobility, and these have the potential to make private mobility optional and no longer necessary. So perhaps now we have the missing link to make mass transit a success in Vietnam. And one of these emerging innovations is Kick Vietnam, a company with a mission to build green, sustainable, shared transportation systems for Vietnam. In a few moments, I will be speaking to Ngan Tran, the CEO of Kick Vietnam, who will introduce us to Kick. And in this call, I will also be speaking to Ha Tan, the Healthbridge Livable Cities project manager, who is managing the implementation of Kick in the beautiful city of Hoi An. And this is being done as part of a wider non-motorized transport project funded by GIZ and implemented by Healthbridge in Hoi An. Without further ado, let's roll the interview. So as a side note, Kick is a Singapore-based company reimagining urban transportation with a wide variety of shared electric last-mile solutions to optimize the movement of people and goods. And recently, under the leadership of Ngan Tran, they launched their bicycle sharing system in Hanoi Eco Park and Hoi An, Vietnam. And they hope for a nationwide expansion in the very near future. Thank you for taking the time. It really is a pleasure to meet young sustainable mobility entrepreneurs and pioneers in ASEAN who share a very similar interest for innovation and sustainable and shared mobility. First things first, I was wondering if you could share with us a little more about what Kick is and how, but also why it came into existence.
So Kick started in 2016-17 in Singapore. We actually started as an electric mobility company. We have a special technology using the ultra-capacitor battery to use for our electric bicycle and other devices for mobility. I myself am Vietnamese, and we look into Vietnam and we see that there are many potentials to adopt the system, the shared system in Vietnam, especially when the country is developing and the infrastructure is improving. We have gotten a lot of help, especially from GIZ and Healthbridge, in deploying the system first in Vietnam. So we have our first mixed electric bike and mechanical bike share system in Hoi An.
Okay, great. I've seen different systems around the world that operate quite differently. So I was wondering if you could explain to us very briefly how it works and maybe talk us through the user experience from, say, registering to the Kick platform, what kind of identification is required to register,
to also booking a vehicle and performing a trip?
We have both electric bicycle and mechanical bicycle. In Hoi An, the city is more suitable for mechanical bike because with the city, we are aiming to build a non-motorized system to encourage the people there to use more bicycle, even for the tourists and the local people there. To use the system is actually quite similar to other systems in the world where the user can download the application from the app store and they can register with their phone number, their email, and then they can choose the bike from our map. They can choose both electric bike and mechanical bike, and when they ride the bike, right, all the trip data will be recorded into the system so that this data will be feedback to the Hoi An local government so that they can use this data to further plan their transport system.
Okay, that's great. You generate all this data and you willingly share it for the benefit of the local cities. Is it a dock-based system or a floating system?
The team has advised us to actually do a dockless system, but because we believe that the dock system is a better solution, so we mix it into a hybrid one, which is a geo-based system, where we don't need to have a physical dock which takes up space, but in every parking area, right, we have a virtual geo-fence which we drew it on the map so that the user can only park into the parking station and take the bike and park the bike from there. When we started the project, obviously the COVID wasn't there yet and the system was targeted at the tourist people in Hoi An City because the Hoi An City, although it's very small, but it's quite famous all over the world. But during COVID, not many tourists are there, but we are able to encourage the local people to use the bicycle in the city.
I've been to Hoi An. I traveled around Da Nang, Hue, and Hoi An, and they are beautiful cities. Speaking of my own experience as a tourist, they were overrun with motorbikes, not quite like in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, but they're still very busy. And the motorbikes that we use today are very noisy, very disruptive. If I imagine going there in the future and there's only electric bicycles, I really think that would be a very pleasant experience and it would significantly improve my personal experience as a tourist.
They aim that more people, not only the tourist people, but also the local people will use the bicycle more and more instead of the motorbike to improve not only the air quality of the city, but also the experience in the city itself. When Yori said that there are many bicycles before Doi Mới, and we hope to bring that back and to enhance the UNESCO, the heritage side, cultural side of Hoi An City.
Just one other question that I'm curious. Vietnam has also been implementing or attempting to implement various higher capacity public transport systems. Ho Chi Minh City developed a BRT that unfortunately did not prove to be very successful. And I believe Hanoi has developed a BRT. Have you looked at potentially integrating the bicycles with the BRT services? My understanding was that the stations were not easily accessible on foot because it's very hard to walk in many big Vietnamese cities. However, it's much easier to cycle along the road. But if you own your motorbike, you're very likely to just drive to your destination. If you have an effective shared mobility solution, you can break that link and you make private mobility no longer necessary because you add new options using the shared bicycles.
Yeah, that's right. So besides Hoi An City, right, we are also looking at other projects in other cities in Vietnam, like in Hanoi as well. So as you know, in Hanoi and both Ho Chi Minh City, we are having the metro and the BRT system as a mass public transportation for the people here. We are also working with the University of Transportation to look into the option how we can connect these stations with the station, the metro station, the BRT station, so that people can use it as a alternative. Instead of they ride their own motorbike or take car there, they can ride the bicycle from their residential area to go from their area into the station and use the public transportation. So we are actually working on that.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that because I do feel that was very much the missing link in the overall ecosystem. It's great to have high quality public transport, but if you do not make the public transport accessible, or you don't make the stations easily accessible from the surrounding areas, then the system is going to be limited in how many people it can capture. But with shared bicycles, shared electric bicycles, you expand the station threshold. So you increase the number of people that can access the high quality public transport. And so you benefit the public transport system, but the transport system also benefits you, because you can also capture a lot of the riders coming from the metro or the BRT.
And one more question for you. Are there any unique features to the Hoi An bicycle sharing scheme?
So there is one thing in Vietnam that for this bicycle system, right, people like to carry another person at the back. So at first, when we only have the one seat bicycle, they all complain. They request for the second seat in the bicycle. So we install the seat on the back of the bike to be suitable with the local people here.
Oh, that's great. I see it. I was wondering if that was the battery or a seat. I haven't seen that anywhere else in the world. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Up next, I'll be speaking to Ha Tan, the Healthbridge Livable Cities project manager.
Why did Kick Vietnam decide to implement the bike sharing system specifically in the city of Hoi An? And very beautiful city, by the way.
It's a UNESCO World Heritage City in Vietnam, and it is very beautiful city. But it was facing increased motor, which has led to increasing road congestion, air and noise pollution. This is part of our bigger project in Hoi An to make the city become a bicycle city project to implement low cost and free bicycle sharing system in Hoi An, funded by GIZ and implemented by Healthbridge and Hoi An city government. So the reason why we selected Hoi An, very small and beautiful city with increasing number of tourists, and the city government is very committed to develop sustainable transportation in Hoi An. They have developed and approved comprehensive bicycle transportation plan in Hoi An in 2018. It's the first one in Vietnam to implement the public bike sharing scheme.
As you are very aware, climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and transport in many countries around the world is the second biggest polluter. How Kick contributes to climate change mitigation or adaptation?
Set up the bike sharing scheme in Hoi An has provided an alternative means of sustainable transportation for both locals and tourists, and this has supported the city goal of urban mobility transformation, as we said. And we expect that this will contribute to the city goal to make bicycle travel become one of the main mode of transportation in the city, to reach the 15% by 2025 and 30% by 2030 as a target set out in the city bicycle transportation comprehensive plan.
Thank you for sharing. And having visited Hoi An in 2015, the city and many of the cities in Vietnam, in particular Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, have become overrun with petrol-powered motorbikes, which are obviously polluting in terms of noise pollution and air quality pollution. And speaking from the perspective of a tourist, I would love to return to Hoi An in a future where there's predominantly electric bicycles, which are quiet, clean. So that's really a great initiative. I very much look forward to returning to Vietnam. I don't know when that will be possible, and it's good to see that they're urbanizing with sustainability in mind, and also various shared economy principles. So I would like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining the call, sharing all your insights, generally on such interesting and innovative projects that will create a more livable and sustainable transport system in Vietnam.
For more information, visit us at www.summer.asia or find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We look forward to seeing you there.
Okay, thank you, Nyantran and Tlakuchana for this interview, and Conrad for this super nice video. But we are very short on time, so we're going straight away with the music. And if you have any Q&As, please feel free to write them on the chat. No? Go for it.
Can you ask me for sound?
Is this sound okay?
When I wake up, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk, yes, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I ever, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who's ever into you. But I will walk 500 miles. I will walk 500 more. Just to be that man who walk 1,000 miles, who fall down at your door. When I'm working, yes, I know I'm gonna be the man who's working hard for you. And when the money comes in for the work I'll pass almost every penny on to you. When I come home, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who comes back home to you. And if I grow old, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who's growing old with you. But I will walk 500 miles. I will walk 500 more. Just to be that man who walk 1,000 miles, to fall down at your door. When I'm lonely, I'm gonna be the man who's lonely without you. And when I'm dreaming, yes, I know I'm gonna dream about the time and now with you. But I will walk 500 miles, I will walk 500 more. To be that man who walks 1,000 miles, to fall down at your door. But I will walk 500 miles, oh, walk 500 more, just to be that man who walks 1,000 miles, fall down at your door. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ali. That was amazing. I think it helps us strike a good balance between some quite heavy subject matter with some lighthearted music. So next up, we are going from 2 wheels to 4 wheels, and that will bring us over to the country of the Philippines, where we will talk about the infamous or the iconic jeepney. If you haven't been to the Philippines or you're not familiar with this, then I think you'll be impressed. It will blow your mind. Some of these jeepneys are truly incredible. And one thing to note is that a lot of these vehicles, however, are outdated and they do have many externalities, and we will explore all of these. And as a result, the government is making huge efforts to modernize them and, in a sense, transition its entire mobility system from what can be best described as a form of organized chaos into a modern, organized, rationalized, and technologically advanced transport system, which is obviously no small feat. And we had 3 interesting interviews from a local NGO, from the private sector. And yeah, without further ado, please, studio in Ghent, feel free to roll the last video that we'll have time for today.
SMMR, also known as SUMMER, stands for Sustainable Urban Mobility in Metropolitan Regions in ASEAN. SUMMER is an ASEAN-German cooperation project with the objective to implement concepts and strategies for integrated and sustainable mobility across the 10 ASEAN member states. The SUMMER German Cooperation Project is implemented by GFA Consulting Group together with Clean Air Asia, the Wuppertal Institute, and Ruprecht Consult on behalf of GIZ and the ASEAN Secretariat.
In this video, we're going to the Philippines to learn more about the iconic jeepneys, which are the dominant form of public transport and also, in many ways, the backbone of the Filipino economy. We will explore their colorful past, their controversial present, and their hopefully exciting future. To do so, I have some interesting interviews lined up. One with a local entrepreneur and pioneer whose family have been in the jeepney industry since the beginning. They even built the first electric jeepney, a bulletproof Pope mobile, and he's currently rolling out the first jeepney blockchain payment platform and super app. And I also spoke with government representatives and a local NGO. But first, let's go over to the island nation of the Philippines, a country of beautiful beaches, incredible biodiversity, the inventors of karaoke, and perhaps the country with the friendliest people in the world.
Welcome to the Philippines.
We begin in Metro Manila, and this right here is a jeepney. But what exactly is a jeepney? Well, much like the matatu in Nairobi, Kenya, the car rapide in Dakar, Senegal, the blue donkeys in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the Philippines has its own version of medium occupancy paratransit in the form of a 12 to 16 seater minibus that has evolved somewhat organically. And these jeepneys, they operate in the many different cities across the many different islands in the Philippines, but also in the rural areas on fixed or semi-fixed routes with limited interference from the local and national government. Well, that is until fairly recently, but we'll get into that a little later in the video. And why are they called jeepneys? Well, some say it's a combination of jeep, like the vehicles, and jitney, which apparently is American slang for a taxi cab or a minibus. But another theory is that jeepney stands for jeep and knee, because when you ride a jeepney, you're quite literally stuck knee to knee with all the other passengers. And how did they emerge, you might ask? Well, it turns out they have quite a fascinating history dating back to 1946 to the period just after World War II. At the time, much of the railway and public transport systems had been destroyed by the Japanese, leaving little public transport options other than the calesas, which are essentially horse-drawn carts. And when the Americans left the Philippines at the end of the war, it was cheaper for them to leave behind their military jeeps rather than to bring them back to the USA. Shortly thereafter, the jeeps were completely stripped down, elongated, and heavily decorated using paints, chrome, and more recently, also LED lights. And ever since these early jeepneys were upcycled, several local companies have emerged which produce jeepneys from scratch domestically, and in this video I will be interviewing one of these companies. And as I'm sure you've noticed by now, some of the jeepneys are very flamboyant, covered in religious symbols, pop icons, scenic landscapes, and so over time they've really become a symbol of Filipino culture and art. And how do they work? Well, when say first arriving in Manila, it can be a little or very confusing, but with a bit of time and experience, you can start to figure out how the whole system works. In my case, because I didn't have much time, I just asked the people around me, or the so-called barkers who manage the busy jeepney stops. But if you look closely, you can also see placards in the jeepney windshields that indicate their destinations. Or alternatively, you can use an app like J Transit or Sake.ph to view the available jeepney routes. And once you've spotted your jeepney, you just hop in the back and find yourself an empty seat. To pay your fare, you just pass your cash to the person next to you, who will then pass it on to the person next to them until it eventually reaches the driver. And once you think you've reached your desired destination, you just shout out "Parapo," which means please stop, and the jeepney will stop and then you can alight. So that's an overview of how they operate, and also a 75-year history, which takes us to present day. So now let's explore their present day operations, their strengths and weaknesses, and how they fit into the overall mobility mix in the Philippines. And to do so, I'm going to speak with Kathleen De Matera from Clean Air Asia, a local sustainability advocacy and NGO. Hi, Kat. So as I understand it, the jeepneys are for the most part informal in that they operate outside of a regulatory system, which is very common in many emerging cities. However, where this is the case, many governments often look to eradicate these informal modes of transport despite the very important role that they play. In the Philippines, thankfully, this is not entirely the case. The government does acknowledge their very vital function, but also acknowledges their negative externalities. There is a program in place that looks to modernize the jeepneys, so I will be speaking to the Department of Transport about this. But first, I wanted to speak with you as a sustainable transport expert and as someone who's very familiar with the jeepneys. What do you see their main strengths and weaknesses to be?
Thank you, Conrad. So yeah, it is important for us to shift people towards more efficient modes of transport, like the public utility jeepneys. They are important to meet the mobility needs of the people, and they're actually accounting for about 80% of land-based trips. This is also because of their role as feeders to other modes of transport, like buses and railways. Also, jeepneys are very accessible and they're relatively inexpensive, and so it's easy for everyone to just flag down a jeepney and get to where they want to go.
So I have taken several rides on jeepneys in my short time in the Philippines, and I'm amazed. They are abundant. You find them absolutely everywhere. And as someone who didn't know how to get around, I could always easily find a jeepney that would take me to my destination. There was no information available to me as the user, but I could just ask someone on the street, how do I get to Intramuros? And they would tell me, okay, walk down this street and a jeepney will stop and you just take that. It was incredibly complicated, but incredibly simple at the same time.
I've also experienced that in many parts of the Philippines, and it's interesting because you can just speak with your fellow passengers and ask where you will get off. So yeah, I find that that's the very efficient part of this public transport system, because they're just everywhere. It's easy to transfer from one jeepney to the next jeepney. It just works, which is quite nice. There wasn't some big plan that put them in place. They just sort of evolved organically. But obviously, that's great and all for individuals trying to get around, but they do have many negative externalities. So I was wondering if you could speak to those. You know, most of the jeepneys now are running on second-hand and poorly maintained engines, and this significantly contribute to urban air pollution. And of course, a large fraction of the jeepneys have been on the road also for over 10 years. Of course, a jeepney would have lower fuel efficiency than a private car in terms of, vehicle kilometer per liter of fuel, but they can have higher efficiencies in terms of passenger kilometers per liter because of the higher occupancy levels. There's also a need to optimize now the routes, and there's also a need to revisit the larger urban transport ecosystem because times have changed. So there's a need to revisit these and see if jeepneys are still the most fitting form of transport in these corridors, or should we now think about the design of the jeepneys, or should we think about another mode of transport to put in those corridors? That makes sense. Speaking about efficiency, you do see some main corridors in Manila that are just bunched up with jeepneys back to back to back, which could quite feasibly be a light rail-based system or a BRT, but the jeepneys could still feed higher capacity service. So I do see a strong case for reorganizing the jeepney routes. On that thought, are the jeepneys much of a contributor to congestion? It's because they don't have very formal bus stops and they're not well integrated in the street design. In many ways, urbanists, transport planners are kind of like doctors for cities
right now, Metro Manila and perhaps a few other big cities in the Philippines could be considered unhealthy. Their arteries are clogged, and the city could be much healthier in many respects.
You know, just to touch also on the health perspective that you mentioned, if we just place old vehicles with Euro 4 or electric vehicles, that will reduce roadside emissions, and that will significantly reduce the exposure of urban population to air pollution. Of course, a lot of the people are more concerned about the socioeconomic aspect. How much is it going to cost me as an operator? How much is it going to cost me as a driver? How much is it going to cost me as a passenger? Is it going to be more expensive for me? That aspect of that health perspective is something that we really want to look into more closely now.
Absolutely. Localized air pollution is a huge problem that is going to manifest itself in the more distant future. Many people will end up being hospitalized because of respiratory issues, and that comes with a very expensive social bill. So another thought, I imagine there are safety issues. The way the vehicles may be driven, safety for women and children, also more broadly, whether or not they're inclusive to people with mobility impairments, people in wheelchairs perhaps, or elderly people.
There was also some studies before that says like Jeepney riders are about 10 times likely to be a victim of road accident relative to private cars. They have generally poor driving ergonomics because they're rigidly built. So they also pose danger to pedestrians or other vehicles that they hit. Whenever we talk about the chassis now of the jeepneys, we all often would talk about how it's contributing to the poor fuel economy of the jeepney. Like, it's so heavy, it's so rigid. It's also posing that danger because anything that it hits, it's going to be severely affected.
That's interesting. I'd never really thought about the actual ergonomics of the vehicle and how that poses a safety risk. But that's also compounded by the fact that in many jeepneys, the driver is not just the driver. He's also the person doing all the change calculations, handing money back and forth. So his mind is all over the place, and I imagine pretty long shifts.
If you think about like how the women or children can use it, I mean, it's really difficult to use the jeepney if you're a senior citizen or pregnant woman or if you're a child, because they're all the way in the front and the passengers are like alighting all the way from the back, and so they don't know when it's time to go, and sometimes they would go even if you all just have your hand on the rails and you haven't stepped your foot on the first step. A lot of design issues in the Jeepney.
I fully agree the need to upgrade the design of the vehicles, because after all, they are retrofitted military jeeps, and military jeeps are typically made for agile humans that can jump in and out quite easily, not to be public transport vehicles. It's probably about time, or 70 years too late, for these vehicle designs to be public transport vehicles. So I'd like to say a big thanks, Kat. As with many types of informal transport around the world, I think we established that they are absolutely necessary for fulfilling the local mobility needs, which in many ways also drives the local and national economy. But they do have a collectively damaging behavior. So instead of looking to, say, eradicate them, perhaps there are interesting ways we can maximize their strengths and minimize these weaknesses that we spoke about through regulation, through electrification, through digitization, and just overall better integration into the streetscape and also with other modes of existing and perhaps new mass transit.
So these suggestions I just mentioned is essentially what the Filipino government has been working on, or more precisely, the Department of Transport, through the Public Utility Vehicle Modernizations Program, PUVMP, which I've alluded to previously in the video. In a nutshell, this is an ambitious multi-year 10-component program designed to modernize public utility vehicles, their supporting infrastructure and operational procedures through policy, regulation, and standards. And the PUVMP reaches far beyond just the jeepneys, but covers all public utility vehicles. And these comprise jeepneys, tricycles, pedicabs, and the so-called habal-habal. Pretty crazy, eh? And with regards to the jeepney industry, the PUVMP requires that all jeepney operators consolidate and form legal entities or join together under franchises.
So in the future, there is to be no more single jeepney operators. So in other words, under the PUVMP, I can no longer own my own jeepney. I have to instead join a larger jeepney cooperative or company. Also, the program requires that all operators driving a jeepney with an engine that is 15 years or older have to upgrade their jeepney. Not surprisingly, this program has been met with opposition, especially from the single vehicle jeepney operators that I previously spoke about, and even in some instances has turned into protest because they have come to enjoy the freedom of working in a free market. For many operators, the modernized jeepneys are perceived to be unaffordable, and many also believe that the larger cooperations will form monopolies and together drive up the prices. So let's explore all of the above with none other than Joemir Pontawe, the Supervising Communications Development Officer for the Philippines Department of Transport, and he works directly on the PUVMP, who also has family members that own and operate 2 jeepneys. Hi, Joe Pontawe. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Good afternoon, Conrad. It's a pleasure to be here.
I understand the modernization program is much more than a program that aims to modernize jeepneys, and we can get into that. First things first, it would be great if you could explain to us what the Public Utility Vehicle Modernizations Program is, and perhaps what are its main goals and key components.
The common misconception of the general public in terms of the PUVMP is that it focuses on the replacement of old jeepneys and then just put there the new jeepneys being showcased by the government. So basically, the PUV modernization program, when it was launched in 2017, comprises of 10 individual components, and it's more on overhauling the whole of the PUV industry, not just the jeepneys, but all road-based public transport services. That includes the buses. We also have what we call the UV Express. These are utility vehicles like the vans, which provides hop-on, hop-off services as well. Then we also have the field cabs. These are the smaller versions of the jeepneys. That includes also the tricycles, the three-wheelers, which are for hires in the Philippines. And basically, even the infrastructure, the stops, the garages, the terminals, etc. So it's more on providing a better commuting experience for the people. The goal now is to actually harmonize the operations of these different modes that are existing in the Philippines. What we are currently aiming in line with the components of the public transport route planning and the route rationalization components is to have a more cohesive operations and lesser competition among these modes. So what we aim is for example, a bus route to complement a jeepney route in major thoroughfares. And so that's the ultimate goal, not just to modernize, but to have these different modes of public transport to complement each other.
It's very interesting to get a holistic explanation of what the program is. The impression I have is that it's extremely ambitious, perhaps also extremely aggressive. It's a program that will really take transport in the Philippines from what can be perhaps best described as a form of organized chaos to something that's very organized. But going from this organized chaos to this organized transport system will create a lot of chaos. It's extremely disruptive, and perhaps you could argue that it might be negatively disruptive in the very short term. It will affect many people and their livelihoods. It's perhaps also very positively disruptive if you look at it in the medium to long term.
I definitely agree with your observation about the disruptive part. That is why we actually set a 3-year transition period for our stakeholders to be able to adapt to the changes that we're currently implementing. So we're expecting what we call the end of transition period by March of this year.
How does this work to an individual who only owns one jeepney? As I understand it, there's around 55,000 jeepneys alone in Manila. There's also about 43,000 jeepney operators, which means that the majority of jeepney operators only own one jeepney.
Industry consolidation is a very big component of this program. You cannot actually participate in the modernization program if you won't consolidate. That is the primary requirement for the 3-year transition period, to at least transition the mindset and the operations of our public transport operators from behaving individually on the streets to coming up with a fleet management system per route. Before, it's a one franchise, one operator, one unit scheme. What we are requiring under the modernization program is for existing individual operators to strategically merge and form legal entities in the form of cooperatives or corporations, which now will own and operate the fleet. And as part of that, they are required to come up with an organized dispatching system and fleet management system. This will result in the spreading of capital expenses, operational expenses, and other maintenance costs, and of course access to discounts for bulk purchases. Before we launch the modernization program, we have around 300 accredited transport cooperatives. We now have 1,483 transport cooperatives with over 128,000 members.
As I understand it, there is a subsidy financing mechanism in place where the jeepney operator or operators can take out a loan with a fixed interest rate that needs to be paid back over a certain period of time. Thought has been given to how we can allow these jeepney drivers of your own vehicles older than 15 years older to upgrade. Has there been much uptake?
In the Philippines, we have our government financial institutions, specifically Land Bank of the Philippines and the Development Bank of the Philippines, and we partnered with them, and they developed their own loan programs for the PUV modernization. And on top of that, the department is actually providing the equity subsidy. So if you are going to purchase your new PUV unit, you have to pay 5% as a down payment. The department is actually paying for that. And on top of the equity subsidy provided to our operators, they can also scrap their old jeepney units and get the scrap value.
Are things moving forward smoothly, or have you faced any or many challenges?
We are taking one step at a time, and we're currently focusing on the route rationalization, the local public transport route planning, and we've had significant amount of local public transport route plans that are already submitted to the department. And yeah, the current challenge is really on the consolidation. So it's more on saying to operator A to merge with operator B, C, D, and to work with one another with the common goal of providing good and reliable public transport. The challenge for the more than 3 years is to actually change that mindset and behavior. Mindset of sharing your income, having a fleet management system, having a common dispatching system, following the prescribed bus stops, these things. I can actually link you with the cooperative because they have been highlighting how the modernization program, like how fleet management changed the way they perceive public transportation as a system. How dispatching system during peak and off-peak hours actually improve their finances or the flow of their income.
Yeah, if you have examples of what these vehicles, specifically the jeepneys, look like in accordance to the updated standards, that'd be really interesting to see.
So these are some of the prototypes of that were launched before. You can actually stand on the modern jeepney.
I do see that some inspiration has been taken from the Willy Jeep, the Jeep that was used to create the original jeepneys. So I think it is good to see that the new vehicles haven't completely lost touch with their past.
We actually don't care about how the modern PUV will look. Our main objective is to ensure that all these PUV models are compliant with the Philippine national standards. These prototypes were taken in 2018, and much of these have evolved now, and we now have other designs as well.
Joe Pontawe, thank you very much. That was highly informative. You also gave a personal touch, which is very much valued.
It was also nice meeting you, Conrad.
And I very much look forward to seeing how this translates into reality.
Before getting to see it for myself, let's see how the PUVMP government program is translating into the real world. And to do so, I have an interview with Elmer Francisco, a local jeepney entrepreneur and pioneer whose family have been involved in the jeepney industry since day one, which I'll cover with Elmer, but we'll also focus on his direct efforts to optimize and revolutionize the jeepneys from both a hardware and software perspective.
Hi, Elmer. Elmer Francisco, thank you very much for taking the time. I really wanted to cover the topic of jeepneys because they're inherently very fascinating. As you are very aware, their technology, the hardware is somewhat outdated, and with that they have many negative externalities, and there's a lot of efforts underway with regards to the upgrading of the jeepneys, and I wanted to explore that a little more with you. I guess the best place to start is with a brief introduction to you, Elmer Francisco.
I'm Elmer Francisco. I come from a line of jeepney makers since 1947. And somehow, my father and his two brothers, my uncles, they started the Francisco painting shop. So what they did, they turned the jeeps into moving works of art because my uncle is an artist. So it started as a painting shop with a 200 peso capital. Then it turned into a bodybuilding business. The company started building brand new bodies for the jeeps. In 1984, my uncle passed away. We considered him as the founder. He's the artist. My father is the mechanical engineer. We are builders, so we build. We even built the Pope Mobile that was used by Pope John Paul II, the bulletproof Pope Mobile. We can build many different types of vehicles, even armored trucks for banks and security, and also military vehicles, military jeeps.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing. It's amazing to see how one family can come together and pool resources and skills and create public utility vehicles, and as you say, also works of art to serve the greater good.
And could you tell us a little more about the modern and electric jeepneys you have been and are producing?
Starting in the 1980s, we started building electric jeepneys. Then we have prototypes of electric Anfra. But the problem was, and still is, it's the charging infrastructure. We thought of battery replacement stations, but the problem was back then, there were no laws to back it up. We can build electric jeepneys, but you cannot register it with the Land Transportation Office. Unlike now, there are, but the problem still is the ecosystem. I'd like to go for the full electric, but of course there are constraints. Because 250,000 jeepneys, that's huge. A single company can't do it. We need to come together to do it. Even international companies, international banks are chipping in.
Yeah, absolutely. A 250,000 vehicles is a lot of hardware. On the topic of going electric, what was the reason for looking to go electric as far back as the 1980s? Because that predates many efforts in the rest of the world.
Climate change is real. We all know that. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? If we create solutions, we did not introduce it fully to the market because the infrastructure did not exist. In short, the technology did not, to enable it did not exist as well. Unlike now, we have lithium batteries. Before we were using the lead acid deep cycle batteries. Then we have 7 to 8 batteries in a car. So it's really not practical. But now with the technology, though it's still pretty much expensive, the battery is practically 60% of the cost of the jeepney. But there are technology right now that are just being tested that would make charging stations obsolete. So we wouldn't want to invest heavily into charging stations right now. So we might as well wait a little.
It's great to see that through entrepreneurship, you're looking to mitigate climate change. You also alluded to some of the key problems of the jeepneys, and well, one is the outdated engines. Are there any other key problems within the jeepney space or public transport space that you're looking to solve?
And I'm referring specifically to the EFI wallet and super app that you've developed.
EFI wallet. It's a fleet management system and also electronic payment system. EFI stands for Elmer Francisco Industries, so it's practically my name. I had this developed internally for our own use. Now, with EFI wallet, we can sell the fares in advance. It's like a prepaid cell phone. That way, the drivers and the operators won't lose their income. So, because we can sell them in advance. Then, for the passengers, they can book their trips in advance as well with our QR ticketing. If you download it, you can actually choose your route. So you can book it in advance. We call it EFI Cash. It also automates the fare collection system. As I mentioned earlier, we created this for internal use. That's our initial purpose. But our government asked, specifically the Department of Transportation, asked me, I can open this to the public. And it's also a fleet management system where you can see where the jeeps are at any given moment on the map. We can easily track, and we can also see how much the jeepneys are earning at any given time. Unlike before, they're paying with coins. So how will you track that? And for the government's point of view, it's also easy for taxation, because now, how will you know how much the jeepney is earning? You would never know actually, unless the honest driver reports it. We want the best system. We want to use the best possible service to give to the Filipino people. The Philippines now is not lagging behind. With our new system, especially the EFI wallet, we will soon be at the forefront in ASEAN, maybe next to Singapore.
It's really a story of integration through innovation, from, I suppose, integrating art with vehicles to integrating the vehicles with interchange hubs to enable them to operate effectively as feeder services, down to, I suppose, digital integration of various payment platforms. I would like to say a big thank you for sharing all these insights. I would love to return to the Philippines sooner rather than later. I'd love to get a ride on an electric jeepney and test out the EFI wallet.
Thank you, Conrad, for having me.
So after an adventure in the various corners of my living room and around the Philippines, this brings us nicely to the end of the video. So to recap, we learned from Kat that the jeepneys work, and they work really quite well in terms of getting people from A to B, but they do have a number of negative externalities, particularly in relation to safety, inclusivity, and health, which seem to only be getting worse as the city continues to urbanize and motorize, which is certainly a big cause for concern. We then learned from Joamir Pontawe how the government is addressing these issues through policy, standards, plans, and regulations under the Public Utility Vehicle Modernizations Program umbrella, which, as we heard, seeks to do much more than just modernize the jeepneys. Rather, it includes measures that will improve urban and rural mobility for all in the Philippines, assuming the government can successfully change the local mindset. And lastly, we saw from Elmer Francisco how this is translating into reality through electric jeepneys and software payment and fleet management solutions. And although not mentioned in the interview, he also showed me how the modern jeepneys can comply with government standards by including CCTV cameras, easy boarding and alighting, as well as access ramps, all while still retaining the iconic jeepney look, which I think is very important for public approval and a smooth transition. And the PUVMP is still very much a work in progress, and the task at hand is massive. As established in the video, it is negatively disruptive in the short term, and those unable or unwilling to adapt do face an existential threat, but one must not forget the risk of inaction. In a context of rapid urbanization, motorization, and increasing urban density, can the city even absorb 5, 10, or 20% more vehicles in a business as usual scenario? And if it does, what impact will that have on public health and quality of life? And what will be the cost from the added congestion on the economy? And when we put it this way, it is clear that change is needed. If and when the 10 components are successfully implemented, it does have the potential to create a much more organized and efficient transport system, which will translate into an improved quality of life for the larger Filipino society through reduced congestion, and in turn, the movement of people and goods will flow more efficiently to the benefit of the wider economy. And through the improved air quality attained from the more modern and electric vehicles will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and otherwise imminent respiratory problems. And also, the modernized vehicles, they will increase passenger safety and inclusivity, offering a more smooth, safe, and seamless experience, And lastly, the rationalization and integration of public and shared transport systems will allow for a more efficient, comfortable, and dignified user experience, in turn making public transport more attractive and competitive with the private car, which will serve to slow private motorization rates and thus congestion. All in all, it is truly exciting to see the Philippines domestically develop and also embrace international best practice principles and technologies. It's going to be somewhat of a bumpy road, but I am optimistic about the Filipino future, and I do hope that other emerging Southeast Asian cities and nations, and essentially any city or nation with a high share of informal transit, can take inspiration from the Philippines. That's it from me. See you in the next video.
For more information, visit us at www.summer.asia or find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We look forward to seeing you there.
Great. Hello. Everyone, you can hear me? I am live. Okay. Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we couldn't cover the entire video, and we still have a whole other video that we didn't get to show. But I think it just speaks to our passion for shared mobility. This video concludes by just talking about the program, and yes, it is quite a controversial program because in the short term it is very negatively disruptive, but in the long term you could argue that it's very necessary and therefore positively disruptive. And we also have to think about the implications of inaction. If we do not upgrade the jeepneys, then what happens? In a context of rapid modernization and further urbanization and motorization, can Filipino cities continue to grow? Can they have or absorb 5, 10, or 20% more transport? That is a big question that needs to be asked, and the government does need to provide a solution or several solutions through various programs. So honestly, and this is my personal opinion, I am quite impressed with what's happening in the Philippines, and I do hope that other ASEAN emerging cities with high shares of informal transport do and can draw inspiration from them, but also beyond ASEAN to any city with informal transport. How are we doing for time? Do we have time for one more song? 4 minutes? So I'll take that as a yes. So Ali, and I'll ask the wider team to come up as well. Obviously a lot of work went on in the background, and the whole team was involved. So I will bring them up. We have a very small audience, unfortunately. Hopefully next year, if this event is still online and live, we can all be together somewhere in the world. And to wrap things up, we'll have one very last song.
So everyone's just gonna be here and this is gonna be.
Yeah, you're eyes on the chair. Yes. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, rock. Let's go.
Living easy, living free, season ticket on a one-way ride. Asking nothing, let me be, taking everything in on my stride. Don't need reason, don't need right, and nothing I'd rather do. Going there, all the time, I'm gonna be there too. I'm gonna highway to hell, highway to hell, highway to hell, highway to hell. No stop signs, living. Nobody gotta slow me down. Like a wheel, gotta speed it. I'm gonna mess around. Hey, Santa, pay my dues. I'm on a highway to live. Highway to live. Highway to hell. Highway to hell. Woo! Gracias. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much. Nice session.
That was.
Well, thanks everyone for participating. We are very fortunate to live in a very dynamic city full of creatives, and you're also very lucky that I'm not the one singing here, and that we have so much talent around us. So if there's any questions or if there's time for questions, we are here to take them. But we would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who attended, everyone who contributed, for Shared Mobility Rocks, for, I guess, bringing us all together.
We call the website, LinkedIn, Facebook.
And yes, as I mentioned in the chat section, we will be posting a lot of this content on our various social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn. So these videos, but also the videos we didn't show, and much more of information on our activities. And yeah, we're also a reasonably small and dynamic team, so we're quite flexible. And this was our way to really experiment with these new forms of media. So I really do hope you enjoyed. It was a big learning experience for us, and I hope
Summer rocks.
And yeah, summer rocks.
Well done, guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Fantastic session.
It was a pleasure working together with you. Well
Awesome.
done.
See you next time.
Bye bye.
See you next time.
So don't run away. We have a video now. We have an interview with the Shared Mobility Rockstar in the intermezzo and some surprises. But first, go to the video about the Shared Mobility Rocks rules.
Shared mobility rocks. Shared mobility rocks. Shared mobility rocks. Shared mobility rocks.
Hi guys, so we are in Oika headquarters, Phnom Penh. We're here to meet Ka Wong, who is the president and founders of Oika.
Oika is the Singaporean company that builds the battery swap and charging infrastructure, and GoTo is their shared e-moped system and brand here in Cambodia.
I mean, we are very happy to see that innovation is happening in Cambodia, which is in the center of the greater Mekong region, but also of ASEAN. And you came all the way from Singapore to introduce this new system here. What is your experience with the Cambodian market environment and authorities?
Southeast Asia has some of the highest penetration of motorcycles in the world, right, per capita population, right? So you're looking at the market, 80% of people will use motorcycles as transportation. And also there's upwardly mobile, younger group of people that are coming into the economy who are interested in climate change and are interested in looking at alternative vehicles, right? That plus the fact that we make this price point significantly less than petrol vehicles. So that's very exciting. It's showing a lot of promise, and we think that Cambodia is a great test market. If we can make it work here, we can make it work in the rest of the Southeast Asian markets.
Phnom Penh, if you can make it there, you can make
you
it
can
anywhere.
make it anywhere, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's tough, right? I mean, your traffic conditions, internet issues, parking, the police taking the bikes away. Yeah, if you can resolve these issues, then hopefully you can do that.
There are several countries that move to ban motorcycles in cities.
Yes.
And for good reasons of
Yes.
pollution and noise.
Yeah.
Sometimes accidents.
Yeah.
Do you think that the electric motorbike will prevent this move from happening, and that actually we find the right balance between soft mobility and motorized mobility, and create a new concept of urban mobility altogether?
I mean, that is happening in Europe, right? We're seeing that, there are greater emphasis on infrastructure for electric mobility, electric scooters, for example, they're passing regulations to make that happen. I think Southeast Asia is quite a long way away from that infrastructure point of view, but my view is that just from an economic dynamic, we're going to make electric motorcycles too appealing to people not to use it. It's just going to appeal to your wallet, right? It's going to be cheaper to use. So I think that's the first step. Let's get adoption of electric vehicles. Then you solve the pollution problem, and then the gridlock problem is a different issue. But I think that's going to be further out into the future.
You don't even want to buy a car anymore if you have this.
Yes, exactly. I mean, just from a cost perspective, the parking, there's so many issues that make it easier.
So efficient use of space.
Yes, an efficient use of space. That's right.
You don't only reduce the space that you need to get around, but by reducing the number of bikes in parkings,
yes,
you also reduce the parking space
yes.
requirements.
Yeah, that's the key to the economics of rideshare, right? The simple fact is you're taking one asset and you're spreading it amongst a lot of people, as opposed to every single person having his own vehicle. So that has impacts on parking, has impacts on ownership, has to some degree impacts on the amount of traffic on the road as well.
Yes, okay, so the next electric motorbike revolution will be from ASEAN.
I hope so.
Okay, we are looking forward to it. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very
for
much.
your welcome
Thank you.
and success.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit us at www.summer.asia or find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We look forward to seeing you there.
Daimong. Cyclo. So I'm at Central Market looking for what once was the main form of public transportation in Phnom Penh. And they are commonly known as cyclos or cycle rickshaws, or more traditionally vélo pousse, which is French for bicycle push. And the Cyclo is essentially a tricycle designed to carry passengers on a for-hire basis. And in Phnom Penh, you see them slowly and quite majestically roaming the city streets, or quite often taking a nap
in what can be best described as recliners on wheels.
And as it turns out, they are deeply rooted in Cambodian, Vietnamese, and even French history. So as a professional urban planner who's worked with informal transport in Asia and Africa, naturally these guys caught my eye, and I was curious to find out more about how they emerged, who they are, what their day-to-day looks like. And so in this video, I will share my findings from researching them, riding them, and interviewing them. 1 second, let me show you one of the favorite Cambodian pastimes, and then we'll start the video. Before going to meet them in person, I did some searching online to see what we could find.
And besides old photographs and cyclo tour companies for tourists, there's very little information about their actual history.
But I kept digging, and here's what I found, and it's actually quite fascinating. We begin in the 19th century in what was at the time
French Indochina, which was essentially a grouping of French colonial territories in Southeast Asia, including present-day Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. During this time, the French colonialists observed a human-powered rickshaw, which they saw as a harsh and cruel means of transportation. It's really kind of like a wheelbarrow for humans. But anyway, in the early 1930s, the French Ministry of Public Works began trials of this three-wheel pedal-powered alternative, which they even showcased in Paris, together with a big publicity campaign that even involved the legendary Tour de France winners who publicly tested these designs.
And in 1933, after the first prototype had been built, a man named Pierre Coupeau built and designed his own version to bring to French Indochina.
He had been living in Phnom Penh since the early 1920s and owned a local bicycle company. And he managed to obtain a contract from the local government to develop his prototype of what he called the vélo pousse, aka the present-day Cyclo. And he tried to do the same some 220 kilometers away in Saigon. However, the authorities there, they weren't interested. They thought his concept was simply too revolutionary. And so he had the brilliant marketing idea to host the Great Cyclo Trial of 1936. And on February 9th, two local cyclists got on a vélo pouce and started making their way towards Saigon. The duo traveled day and night, making the 220-kilometer trip in just 17 hours and 20 minutes, considerably faster than any human-powered rickshaw could do. The display was a huge success. Now that sounds like a trip worth repeating. And when they made it to Saigon, the event was such a huge success and received so much publicity that the mayor of Saigon, he relented and he allowed 20 of these cyclos to operate on the city streets. And by 1940, almost every human-powered rickshaw in Saigon had been replaced by the new Cyclo, which is quite evidently the word for Cyclo. And in the 1950s, following World War II, when the French finally withdrew from Cambodia and Vietnam, which brought them their independence, the Cyclo still endured as the popular means of transportation, simply because it was superior to bicycles for hauling cargo and groups of people. And with their newfound independence, both countries regained control over domestic manufacturing. And because the Cyclo is fairly easy and inexpensive to build, and much of the materials can be found in local markets, both countries began manufacturing cyclos of their own. And so, throughout the 1950s and 60s, the cyclos continued to grow in numbers and popularity. And this takes us to 1975, when the Vietnam War came to an end, and here I couldn't find much more information on Cambodia, so the next section is mostly focused on Vietnam. In 1975, after the fall of Saigon, when the Vietnamese War ended and the country came under communist rule, the new authorities organized the cyclo drivers into large cooperatives, essentially formalizing their status as a form of public or shared transport. This takes us to 1986, when Vietnam underwent the Doi Moi economic revolution, and I'm going to call this section Moto Mobility in Ho Chi Minh City. And in the mid-1980s, Vietnam opened up their borders and their economy to the world, and together with rising incomes, this led to an influx of motorbikes, which quickly replaced non-motorized vehicles like bicycles and cyclos. And these motorized two-wheelers offered a fast, flexible, cheap, and effortless mode of transport, especially considering the hot climate. And with that, the cyclos were outcompeted, and they only really had one market left, and that was to move very large and heavy goods that couldn't be carried by motorbike. And if you've been to Vietnam, then you already know that people will carry just about everything on a motorbike. And as the motorbike began to dominate and now make up more than 90% of the mode share in Vietnam, drivers started complaining that cyclos created traffic because they were slow and wide, and so Vietnamese authorities started forcing the cyclos off the major streets. And this takes us into the millennium, and by the mid-2000s, cyclos had been pretty much banned in every major city in Vietnam. And in Cambodia, the government authorities haven't been so strict. However, the market forces at play have definitely not been in their favor. This takes us to present day, so let's end the history chapter here and go see them for ourselves, 86 years since their inception. And to do so, tomorrow we're going on a sunrise cyclo ride as part of a charity event. So see you tomorrow, bright and early. It's 6 a.m. on a Sunday. Who wakes up on a Sunday at 6 a.m.? Apparently the Cambodians, they wake up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday to do some stretching. And the reason why we're up so early is because we're going on a We arrived at our starting location, and while waiting for the others to arrive, we got the opportunity to test out one of the cyclos. Here we are, I'm taking Princess for an early morning ride, her human-powered chariot. It's a single gear, so I can't stop pedaling. You can't find the brakes like you would in a normal bike. I have to pull this lever here. And we stop. These guys must have really strong legs.
They have. So how was your first ride?
It was good, it was interesting. But it's nothing like a normal bicycle.
No.
And you need strong legs. These guys must have really strong legs. You want to go ask him how strong his legs are?
Yeah. Hello! You? Strong, huh? Tonton.
We then went for our early morning ride and took over the streets of Phnom Penh like a badass Harley-Davidson crew. Well, actually, it was more like this scene from Wall-E.
Well, then what do you want to do?
I don't know. Something.
Wow. Anyway, our tour went something like this. We departed from Independence Monument and first made our way towards Riverside. And while we're on Riverside, let me give you a little bit more information about the Cyclo drivers we were with. And just as a side note, you can see us wearing Christmas hats, and that's because this event was part of a Christmas charity event that took place shortly before Christmas Day.
So these Cyclo operators we're with today are part of the Cyclo Conservation and Careers Association that supports 280 Cyclo drivers. And unfortunately, with the arrival of companies like Grab and Passap that now operate on-demand tuk-tuks, they have suffered and their customer base has significantly dropped. And in more recent years, they've been used mostly for tourism purposes to do city tours. But with the recent outbreak in COVID, the numbers of tourists has decreased, and so their business has decreased.
And just a quick note on COVID, if we all look somewhat careless, it's because Cambodia, through a mix of luck, strategy and environmental factors, has managed to escape the worst of the pandemic. Here in Cambodia, there's been 0 deaths, and at the time of recording, there were 0 cases in the country. And yes, full acknowledgement that we are truly lucky to be able to continue living fairly normal lives, obviously with just some extra precautions and much fewer tourists in the city and country. Okay, now back to the tour. We then went around Wat Phnom, an ancient Buddhist temple and also roundabout. We then continued towards the iconic Art Deco Central Market, which was built in 1937 in the French colonial period, and at the time it was the biggest market in Asia. We then continued towards the contrastingly modern Vatanak Tower, aka the Rosewood Hotel, which is meant to look like a big dragon. However, if you ask me, it looks a lot more like a snail, which is where I offered to give my driver a little break.
So naturally, as a cycling activist, I had to give it a try. It's very pleasant. You sit tall on these bicycles and you have a really nice perspective on the city. You tower over the cars, which is probably why the Cyclo drivers seem to carry this much wisdom.
To complete the tour, we headed back towards Independence Monument, and as you might have seen from the history section, this tour took place on the very same streets where the Cyclos used to dominate. But today, they are far and few between, and according to CCCA, back in 1999, there were 1,500, yet today there are fewer than 300. To better understand the recent disappearance, let's take a break from the Cyclo tour and take a look at Phnom Penh's evolution over the past 2 decades, which has very much shaped the modern-day city.
So we're in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, in one of the countries with the fastest growing economies in the world. And here in the capital, this translates into rapid expansion, both upwards and outwards, and it doesn't look like the construction boom will stop anytime soon. And everywhere you look, old buildings are being torn down, and as you can see, without much health and safety. And in their place, placeless towers are being erected next to misplaced architecture. And case in point, this even includes a fake Paris, which is on Diamond Island, and this was empty marshland with a couple farms only back in 2008. And much of this boom is financed by foreign direct investment coming into Cambodia, especially from China. Since 2008, investors from China have poured in more than $11.5 billion into Cambodia, which is great because it's lifting many people out of poverty. However, there is a growing and widening wealth gap, with most of this wealth being concentrated in the upper classes, but more on that in a future video. And with that, the city is rapidly modernizing and motorizing, leaving little room for non-motorized forms and traditional forms of transport. And in 5 years, it is likely there will be so many cars and so much congestion, which will create an ever stronger case to eradicate these slow, bulky modes of transport. Don't get me wrong, progress is good, but in my view, this is all happening too fast and is fueled too much by foreign interest. And with that, heritage is being lost, and not just traditional buildings are being torn down, but also modes of transport and ways of life are disappearing forever. And with that, the city is losing part of its charm and part of its identity. And in 10 years, we might look out our car window, stuck in ever-increasing congestion, and look up at placeless glass buildings and think back nostalgically of what once was with a feeling of regret. And this loss of heritage also extends to the Cyclos. So on that note, let's go back to the cycle tour. Kasi, how was it?
That's amazing.
It was amazing.
I loved my ride. You're the best.
So this marks the end of our tour, and I have to say, and I think Daniela agrees, that this was a very comfortable experience. Felt like we were sitting in armchairs, but being taken on a journey through the city. We saw all the key monuments. It's just a really pleasant way to explore our city, our home.
Despite the positive experience they deliver, as mentioned, they do unfortunately face an existential threat. Thankfully, there is an association that supports cyclos, known as the Cyclo Conservation and Careers Association. So after the tour, I took the opportunity to speak to the man in charge.
You set up the Cyclo Association?
Yeah, right. In 1999.
And he is on a mission to improve their quality of life. CCCA currently supports over 280 drivers by providing them with basic washing facilities, medical care, driver training, and a small daily stipend. They are not yet a fully fledged Cambodian NGO, and their funding is very limited, so I will include a link to donate in the description below.
And we're off to interview some cyclo drivers.
So now let's go and learn a little more about the life of cyclo operators firsthand. And because my Khmer is very limited to do so, I'll be meeting up with Sotea and Sovan, my Cambodian bongs and colleagues from work. And just as a relevant side note, here in Cambodia, we are all brothers and uncles depending on our age and relationship. And together we will interview two cyclo operators, one of whom has been pedaling since the very early days of the cyclo.
So our cyclo driving friend right here is 89 years old.
Hello gentlemen, how are you?
I am fine.
So I'd be very interested to hear more about your lives as cyclo drivers. But first, Uncle, tell me, how old are you?
I am 88 years now.
Oh wow, and how about you, brother?
I am 42 years old.
And tell me, how long have you been riding your cyclo?
10 years.
Oh, 10 years. And how about you, Uncle?
Oh, I started cycling after the marriage.
Oh, you started that long ago. And are you from Phnom Penh or from another province?
Oh, I am from Sweden.
And how about you, brother?
I am from Freebanks.
Uncle and brother, speaking frankly, why did you choose to become cyclo drivers?
Frankly speaking, I am poor. Yeah, because I am poor and have no other job besides cycling.
So as I understand it, you live and sleep in your cyclos on the side of the road.
Oh yeah, that is our daily life.
And as a cyclo driver, where do you sleep these days? Oh, so you sleep outside the Angkor cinema. Do you have to pay to stay there?
Oh, I pay nothing. I only pay for the cyclo rental. It's about 2,000 real per day.
And if you live outdoors, how do you stay clean?
Pay only 200 real per water bucket.
And how about you, Uncle?
Oh, it's the same. We spend about 4,000 real for daily food.
And Uncle, please tell me, how is life as a cyclo driver these days?
Oh, a big shortage of income now.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear. What kind of income shortage?
I am poor.
And tell me, how about you, brother?
Yeah, our time is tough right now.
And now with this COVID situation, how has that affected your daily income and livelihood?
Yeah, COVID does affect on our daily income. Now we get less and less from day to day.
Nowadays, is there more or fewer cyclo drivers on the streets of Phnom Penh?
Oh, less and less now. If without any conservation made by the Prime Minister, and then the population will go down.
And do you happen to know the current population of cyclos in Phnom Penh?
Oh, in the past, it's more than 7,000.
Oh wow, 7,000. And how about now?
So now we have around 308 cyclo.
And since starting your career as a cyclo driver, how has your income been?
So I could earn in between 40,000 to 70,000, and now it's declined to only 30,000 real per day.
Oh, that's a big reduction. And how has the arrival of tuk-tuks affected business?
Oh, the arrival of tuk-tuk does affect on my daily income.
And Uncle, you are of great age. Will you be able to continue riding your cyclo in the future?
Yeah, I still could do it.
Great, you're still full of energy. And how about you, brother?
Yeah, I'm fit to it. I'm riding it every day.
And Uncle and brother, tell me, how long have you been part of the Cyclo Association?
Oh, it's quite recent. It was last 2 years. Yes, that's about 2 years. The same as Uncle.
And why did you decide to become a member of the Cyclo Association?
Yeah, I joined to get the government subsidy.
Okay, and what kind of support do you get from the government?
To get some support on the supplement on the source of income, and also to get a cyclo for a daily rise, and become a member of the association in order to get the daily supplement from the government. Yeah, we got about 7,000 real stipend for the daily meal.
And uncle, do you plan to ever retire?
Oh, I will quit when I have no energy to write more.
Okay, so when you no longer have the energy. And you, brother, you look strong. How about you?
Oh, I really have no idea.
And tell me, brother, you are young, and uncle, you're old. Which one of you earns more money?
Yeah, I'm not proud of myself, but I earn more because people give me more money because they see me old. So there's even less customer, but they give me more money.
That was really insightful. Thank you, uncle, and thank you, brother.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
This brings us nicely to the end of the video, so I hope it was educational or at least somewhat entertaining. On a final note, I don't know about you, but I do not believe that progress and development should necessarily be defined by how many towers we build or how nice the cars are on our roads, and perhaps progress should not mean that the past is made obsolete, because to be happy as a society, we need identity, and our identity comes from our heritage, so when shaping the future, we should look to the past. And Cambodia is a country and culture with a very rich history which should be celebrated. And yes, full acknowledgement, the Cyclo is indeed a fusion of French and Khmer culture, and yes, the business model does need to change. But instead of blindly driving them to extinction, perhaps there are better ways to integrate them and upgrade them, whether it's through electrification or using on-demand apps. And in Singapore, for example, when they set out to formalize informal street vendors, they created the now famous hawker centers, a very popular attraction for locals and tourists, which is essentially a designated space where those who were once street hawkers can now conduct their business. And yes, it's very different to what it once was, but at least it's not completely lost. Through this video, I can only ask one thing from you. If you live in or are visiting Phnom Penh and you're not in a hurry, do take a Cyclo. They are comfortable, cheap, sustainable, and most of all, the drivers are charming. And together, we can help them reach their 100th birthday instead of blindly eradicating them. Thanks for watching. Until next time.